Hey, what's going on, YouTube? It's BooLin Sports, and I'm bringing to you my part 2 of my playoff predictions and who I think is going to ultimately win the Super Bowl. Once again, I'd like to thank you all for the tremendous support, but without further ado, we'll start with the AFC. So for the AFC, we have the number 2 seed in Baltimore versus the number 7 seed in Cleveland, and I'm going to have Baltimore come out on top, down to experience and what kind of team they have established, and Baltimore has a lot more solid and sound team than Cleveland. Cleveland obviously has a lot of playmakers, but they're still trying to find their true identity, and I don't think they'll find it all in this one season. Up next, I have the number 3 seed in Buffalo versus the number 6 seed in the LA Chargers, and I'm still going to have the higher seeded team advancing with Buffalo. I think the LA Chargers, they're a very young team. Either way, they're going to have either Tyrod Taylor, who doesn't have a playoff win in his books, or Justin Herbert at the helm. And I just don't think they get it done against this experienced playoff Buffalo team. Up next, I think I have probably the nail-biter of wildcard weekend in the AFC, the number 4 Indianapolis Colts versus the number 5 Houston Texans. And I think Phillip Rivers' record of not being in the playoffs or not winning playoff games is going to cost him here, and Deshaun Watson is going to ultimately win this game due to experience, but I feel like this is going to be a back-and-forth battle between these two division rival teams. Now we are going to head over to the NFC, where we have the number 2 San Francisco 49ers facing off against their division rival in the number 7 Seattle Seahawks, and unfortunately, I feel like this is the end for Seattle here. San Francisco's defense is too good. They have a high-powered running attack, and they're going to still use and abuse that, even after trading away Matt Breida to the Dolphins. Following that game, we have the number 3 Minnesota Vikings versus the number 6 Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And I don't think Minnesota's going to have any more miracles. They're not playing up against the Saints, but they are playing against a divisional rival to the Saints and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. But I don't think Tom Brady's just going to roll over and be a one-and-done this year. I think he's shooting for big things for Tampa, and I think they get the win here. And then the final game for the wild card weekend in the NFC, we have number 4 Dallas taking on number 5 Green Bay Packers. And I think Dallas's time to shine is now. They have a very good offense looking forward into the season, and they also have a good returning defensive unit. As long as that defensive unit stays healthy and does their job, I think Mike McCarthy is going to get revenge against his former team in Green Bay, and they're going to advance to the playoffs. Now we're going to head into the divisional round of the playoffs. This is kind of hard to judge based on there's never been a 7-team playoff seeding, but judging from last year, it seemed the 3 and 6 would always play the 1 seed and the 4 and 5 would play the 2 seed. Therefore, I have Kansas City facing off against the winner of the 2 and 7 game, which would happen to be Baltimore. And I'm going to have this one also be a shootout. I think both offenses are electrifying. Baltimore's defense is better, but I don't think they're going to be able to keep up with this high-powered offense in Kansas City, and I'm going to have Kansas City advancing. Following that game in the AFC, I have Buffalo against Houston. Houston has to come into Buffalo, and I think Bills Mafia is going to reign superior against this team. Overall, I just think Buffalo has a very good-looking offense now with a solid running back in Singletary, and then they have weapons like they finally have and do-it-all receiver in Stephon Diggs. And I think Houston, without Hopkins, isn't going to have that game changer this season, and therefore they're going to alter and ultimately fall to the Buffalo Bills. Flipping over to the NFC, we have the New Orleans Saints facing off against the San Francisco 49ers. I don't think the San Francisco 49ers are going to make a Super Bowl run this season. They didn't lose much, but they also didn't really gain much. Like, they found the replacements where they needed. They lost Emmanuel Sanders. They brought in Brandon Ayuk. They lost DeForest Buckner. They brought in Javon Kinlaw. So I like the moves they did. However, I just think New Orleans made those improvements where they were needed. They didn't lose anyone. They retained Drew Brees. And then they also got back Taysom Hill. And even if either of one of those guys happens to go down, they have Jameis Winston, who does not have any playoff experience underneath his belt. But I feel like working with Breeze and Sean Payton, if he needs to step up, he could possibly do that. They also added a pass catcher in Emmanuel Sanders, and he's going to look for a revenge game against the 49ers, who were unable to make him get a Super Bowl ring. We are approaching the last divisional round game, and I have Tampa Bay versus Dallas. And, you know, Dallas does look good on paper, but so does Tampa Bay. Tampa Bay was, I would say, a handful of turnovers away from making the playoffs. If Winston didn't cost so many costly turnovers, I think Tampa could have been a sneaky playoff team last season. So I'm going to have Tampa advance over Dallas. Dallas still doesn't have that playoff experience, but ultimately Mike McCarthy does, and I think he could be a game changer. I could see this being a high-scoring shootout as well. So we are here in the conference championship where I have the Buffalo Bills facing off against Kansas City. And I'm actually going to have Kansas City going back to the Super Bowl this year. I think Kansas City's just group of core players and position makers and just filling like the holes that they, I wouldn't say necessarily lost, but they just got better. Well, Buffalo is still a team getting used to the playoffs again, and unfortunately they do have a history of choking in big games, and I think this is going to be one where they could have it early, kind of like Houston did against Kansas City last year, and then just lose it. And we are flipping back over to the NFC, where we actually have a divisional opponents duking it out for the Super Bowl here in New Orleans and Tampa Bay. Unfortunately, Tom Brady's road comes to an end here, and Drew Brees is finally going to get his chance to win. I think Drew Brees has a ring or two under his belt. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think Drew Brees is going to go back to the Super Bowl and compete for one final ring. And we are here in the Super Bowl where I have Kansas City facing off against New Orleans. And I do not have Kansas City winning back-to-back Super Bowls this season. I actually have New Orleans and Drew Brees coming out on top with that revamped offense, just basically adding one more playmaker to that very powerful offense. They don't have to face Minnesota and worry about any miracles going on. And I have Drew Brees riding off in the sunset and ultimately announcing his retirement after this game or shortly after, whether it be in the parade or leading up to the offseason. Once again, these are all predictions 8 months in advance. Obviously, a lot could change. Trades could happen. Week 1 injuries could alter what teams look good going forward and stuff like that. But I see New Orleans winning the Super Bowl this season. Drew Brees riding off in the sunset with retirement and everything and just enjoying the rest of his life he has ahead. I plan on doing more videos like this. I plan on doing one that highlights the MVP on both offense and defense, the overall MVP, Rookie of the Year, my breakout candidates for this season, and I'll also get into fantasy football players that I think are going to be huge. But I have a lot on the agenda for this. Once again, I'd like to thank you all for the support. Continue BooLin playing out.